The Arctic represents a promise for the future, the expectation of unlimited resources and well-being for the rest of mankind. Of course, this is not to forget what we have spoken about last time, about who lives in the Arctic, but for major power this is how they see it, as this sort of desert with plenty of opportunities. Still, this vision is again very different from who actually invest in the Arctic. And today we are simply going to explore how Japan and Russia strategy formed and what are the current consequences of such a historical development. This video is mostly about geopolitical history. It doesn't really explore other forms of history, as it was not that much studied nor written in the past, but I hope future research help us understanding Arctic history beyond the Great Bering Crossing. Without further ado, let us start with Russian history in the Arctic. After the fall of the Mongol Empire, Russian principalities and later on the Russian Empire under Peter the Great started a very long expansion to the east. At first, this was mostly for trading some very basic resources such as fur, and increasingly, especially during industrialization, for mineral resources. However, by the technical limitation of that time, exploring further north was quite complicated, and that area of the map was not even mapped, to say the least. This is mostly with Soviet Union that Arctic became mapped, and for the bursting Soviet Union this was a major landmark, as Soviet Union, especially after the death of Stalin, aimed to not only be a superpower on the economic and ideological side, but also on the scientific side, which was probably one of the largest contribution of Soviet Union to modern society, as Russian education at that time created some of the greatest scientific of our time. At first, the technical application of such presence were limited, but with Cold War emerging, this became even more important for the Soviet Union, as this was almost a close border to the US and Canada, including the creation of multiple military bases, radar installation, and simply the idea of having a presence, as for Russia, Arctic Sea is a quite weak point, contrary to its western side, which has quite a lot of natural defenses. In the Arctic, the facade is almost entirely exposed to foreign invasion, and if nobody has tried to do this yet, there's still a possibility in Kremlin deciders' minds. One of the key elements of Russian exploration of North Pole are its incredible icebreakers, and especially its nuclear icebreakers that were created later on, allowing Russia to almost freely navigate in extremely inaccessible seas. This expansion was far from peaceful, and Russian imperialism quickly reappeared, for example with the seizing of Franz Joseph Archipelago by the Soviet Union against Norwegian fishermen and whalers, especially because at that time Norway was not the economical power that we are knowing today. Therefore, protesting against the Soviet Union was extremely difficult. Therefore, this part of the Arctic Ocean became almost entire part of the Soviet territory, and mostly the Russian territory, as no other Soviet republic could profit. Not to mention that this opening to the sea was primordial for Soviet Union on strategic terms, not only during the Cold War but also during World War II, as this is from where American Lend-Lease arrived. Overall, for the Soviet period, the importance of the Arctic, whereas can seem quite minimal, is actually of a strategic importance. Not only the rebirth of an empire after the fall of the Romanov dynasty, but also a way to emerge as a great power among other nations. And for the conflictualities with the rest of the Western world during the Cold War, this was mostly an affair between Soviet Union and Norway, and from my reading the US was way less implied as it is nowadays. Perhaps this is one of the most relevant legacy of the Soviet Union nowadays for the Russian Federation, a great advance compared to its American rival in Arctic affairs. Cold War ending and collapse of the Soviet Union was detrimental to Russian Arctic ambitions, especially on the reduction of its different fleets, mostly the Northern and the Pacific Fleet. However, under Putin's Russia this is no longer the case, creating an open door for more conflictualities with even more unexpected actors. Japanese Arctic history can seem extremely antithetical as Japan has no presence in this area, but it had some ambition to reach this area. This started of course with the complete control of Hokkaido and also the different extension on Kuril and Sakhalin. But the closest point Japan reached was during World War II, with the occupation of Attu Island of the Aleutian archipelago near Alaska. Still, this was only temporary, and World War II left Japan with next to no Siberian territories. But for a great power like Japan, exploring the Arctic was a good strategy to reintegrate the international scene as a way to show prowess not only physically but also scientifically, as Japan was attempting at this time to be number one in many technological aspects. The key date is 1973 with the creation of the National Institute of Polar Research, and with Japan having no Arctic territory, it had to negotiate. And as always, with Japanese politics, international cooperation prevailed, having Japan being hosted in several stations in Norway and Greenland, for example. However, from an outsider mind, until 2012, this was pretty uneventful. However, this date of 2012 also marked one of the first voyages of the Northeast route for Japan, with a Russian tanker going from Norway to Japan using that route. And this is pretty historically significant for Japan, as this was the open door for a better Arctic strategy that took form in 2015, for example, with several white papers. The key points here are not only the commercial aspect, with Japan going north and using alternative route to the most dangerous one, but also developing human connection with the defense of indigenous population. For Japan, this is a way to affirm a form of legitimacy in a region that Japan had no presence until contemporary era. However, unlike Russia, this is not a very pressing priority for Japan, and the talks at the national diet are pretty scarce. So the most important discussion that happened in Japan regarding that are the inter-university discussion organized with the National Institute for Polar Research. For the Federation of Russia, Arctic is a major objective of its power policy. However, the first efforts haven't been the best, in the sense that Russia was not able to reach all of its objectives. The Northern Fleet did not develop as fast as previewed, and the difficult conditions of the Arctic are not always favorable for Russian materials. However, recently the Duma has unveiled some project regarding the Arctic in order to revise this policy. One of the most important points of this future project is that for Putin, Arctic is the future of Russia. With the progressive defrosting of the area, the circumpolar region could become even more inhabitable than it is today. For that, two important pillars are presented. The first is the military one, not only creating bases but also upgrading the ships in order to cross the sea without much difficulties, and of course building more submarines in order to go under the ice sheet. The second point is the energy policy. As for Russia, it is already a pillar of its global strategy, but Arctic resources are yet to be fully exploited at increasing rates. However, with how Russia was impacted by sanctions, those ambitions might be too big, and collaborating with China may not be enough for Russia to fully exploit the region. And there is also the fear that China will only use Russia as a proxy in the region. Therefore, the project is mostly textual at the moment, and less to see if Russia will antagonize the West even more in the future, or will shift back as states don't have real friends, only interests. To conclude, it appears that Russia and Japan have two extremely different approaches that are yet complementary. On one hand, Russia has the material presence and the experience to master this area, but lacks sometimes the critical technologies and funding for its projects. At the contrary, Japan has no presence, a very limited experience, but plenty of idea, technology, and of course funding. Should those two countries collaborate in that area, they could probably rivalize with plenty of bigger Arctic nations such as Canada and the US. However, under the current circumstances of the writing of this video, it seems that Japan is getting closer and closer to the US during Takaichi's mandate. However, as the lifetime of Japanese Prime Minister is often quite limited to only 1 year, this could probably change should another faction of LDP be elected in the next parliamentary elections. Not to mention Japanese current political instability due to the lack of majority. In any case, despite the slowness of decision, there is a high momentum regarding Arctic geopolitics, and I believe this is time this enters into public debates in order not only to inform the public with videos such as the one I'm making, but also in order to create more enlightened decisions, as since this is a very underrepresented topic, especially in Japan, there is the risk that the lack of expertise will be the doom of every stakeholder implied in this affair. This is not the end of this series, but I am going to take a pause in order to prepare fully my PhD application. Therefore, a little pause is necessary, and I will probably only publish more fun episodes like the one you really appreciated on Warhammer in Japan. And I think I will also organize a Q&A session should I reach 100 subscribers on this channel. So do not hesitate to ask me questions in a post that I will create on the SNS page of this channel. In any case, I hope that was as interesting as always, and I hope to see you in the future for more exploration of different Arctic geopolitics.